Okay. So I think we're actually frozen, oddly enough, which is really weird. Let's see if I actually exit full screen. If that helps anything. No, it does not. I do not want to know why this is doing what it's doing. Properties. Okay, just click back to the defaults. I'm pretty sure we are good to go now. Let's see.
I think we're finally going, man.
Yeah, but we were frozen. Hello, guys. How's it going? This is us working out the technical bugaboos here and stuff like that. So bear with us for a hot minute, and then we'll figure it out. Okay, it looks like we're going now. So, okay. So let me work on this real quick. Get this actually functional a little bit, so it doesn't look as poopily doopily, and then we will do our thing. So this might not be the best, most optimal thing in the world, but it gets us on the air. It gets us actually functioning, which I think is the ultimate goal of what we're doing here. Okay, now I hit full screen and it froze again. So let's go here, properties, and reset this. There we go. We should be back again, real quick. And then let me see if I can change a couple things, and then we'll start. I apologize for this, everybody. This is us doing what we have to do in order to make this actually work. So I think we are actually kind of halfway decent. We should be halfway decent now. Once I click that one button, I think we are good to go. Let's see what happens when I do this, and then we'll start the show. Again, I apologize, guys. These are herky-jerkiness. I should have did all this yesterday, but I wait too long to do things, and such is life.
Oh, good, brother.
Okay. So first things first, what are you drinking, man?
So I'm drinking a Brooklyn Cuvée Noir from 2014. I tried to get a black-owned brewery bottle, but couldn't find any. I wanted to go. I'm using the glass. Sometimes we get 18th Street. I was looking for some 18th Street, but my local bottle shop didn't have any. So I figured at the very least, Garrett Oliver being the brewmaster here was something. It's delicious. I ended up doing a review before this video, so I will be posting a review of this. But spoilers, it's delicious.
I'm going to do the same thing. Yeah, a little bit of Brooklyn. I figured I'd start off. I have a couple different black-owned brewery beers that I will be partaking with throughout the night. So we'll see what's what. Let's see. Let's see. You talk some stuff. Clue people into what we're going to be doing tonight while I fiddle around with stuff.
So we're essentially going to, kind of break it down into 4 parts. The intro and talking points is what we're doing now. What's this all about? Some non-beer related race talk, just, what's going on, what has been going on, and then starting to tie it to beer. And then the last thing is, what can we do about it? What can you do to maybe help to help diversify craft beer, things like that. Right off the bat, we were just talking about trying to find black-owned breweries, and I see Beer Advocate is compiling a list. So they have a list going by state. Unfortunately, I live in New York, and the only ones in my state are all in New York City. None of them distribute. I couldn't get down to New York City to try to buy something there. But it is by state, which is a really nice feature, and definitely something people could do, try to support these businesses that do exist in that market, or in your market.
Yeah, and this is kind of born from a couple different things. Obviously, we're going to have this conversation. I mean, the grand scheme of things is, Kyle and I were doing. When did we do that live show? What was it? About a week and a half, 2 weeks ago?
About a week ago.
Well, about a week or so ago, and then we did a live show together, and then we hung out off the air, and we kind of got chatting, and the idea came up about doing this kind of uncomfortable conversation kind of piece. Didn't have a name or anything at the time when we actually kind of thought about doing it, but we were kind of like, people are complaining about your volume. I'll turn you up, brother.
Okay.
There. You should be good to go now. If you don't hear him, then you're freaking deaf. Anyway, yeah, and then it ended up being, one of those things where we kind of wanted to do something, but we didn't know what to do, or at least I should say I didn't know what to do. We're both on the same page here, but it was more like, when all this stuff started going down, and when I say stuff, I don't mean them to make it like a kind of throwaway point. When George Floyd was murdered and everything kind of started happening, it was really kind of a hard thing for me to kind of figure out what to do, because obviously you want to do something. You see just a basic human life extinguished before your eyes in just a brutally fucking fashion. You want to do something, but there's also that kind of delicate kind of walk that you want to do something, but are you the right voices to actually have that conversation? Or as a bearded white dudes, one with magnificent hair, one with not so much magnificent hair, and both bespeckled for your viewing pleasure. We didn't really know. I didn't really know what I could do, and I didn't know if it would be kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Maybe it's kind of weird to have that conversation. You know what I mean? Like, not really, like, it's not my place to have it, basically. That's how I felt. And then the more and more I kind of read and the more and more I kind of listened, which I think is probably the grand scheme of things, is watching, learning, and listening. That's going to be the core point, I think, what most people are going to hammer home, including us, is that, a lot of the more well-versed, more studied people that do this, the people that are really kind of into kind of humanities, whether it be African American humanities, Black Lives Matter, those kind of people, saying the conversation needs to be had between white people. You're not going to sit, the average Black American doesn't need to sit there and actually have this conversation with each other. They've had this conversation for years and years and years. And in order for there to be change from the bottom up, it's a conversation that needs to be had between people like you and myself. Because, it's one of those things where, the title itself came from Bakari Sellers, one of the more, I think, one of the better voices when it comes to, the Black Lives Matter movement and systematic oppression and racism and all those kind of things in the United States. And he said, we have to have the uncomfortable conversation. Now, I actually, when I thought of that, actually somebody else started doing a piece called The Uncomfortable Conversation with a Black Man. It's actually a really good YouTube thing. It's a bit more, Matthew McConaughey was on there. Let's put it that way. So it's a little bit bigger than this one. But I
didn't get Matthew to do this?
No, I didn't get it. All right. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it was just important to have it, because it's not something that's easy. It might be a little bit easier for you because you live a little bit closer to that world, and we'll get to that throughout this. But that's kind of how I felt. I felt there needed to be something to be said. But when we actually sat down together in that kind of virtual room and kind of talked about wanting to do something like this, you were on board with it. What was it? What were your thoughts? How did you kind of compute it up until that point when I kind of talked about it? Was it similar? Was it different? What was different for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're at a same, or at least a similar point, and then we got to it differently. I mean, I'm a history major. I'm a history teacher. So, I mean, I have all that going for me in terms of having read a lot of history and been exposed to a lot of, stuff that, and as a history teacher today in public education, things that aren't always taught, or, things I make a point to teach, you don't have to. And it was Matt's idea to do this. So full credit to Matt. I have done these kinds of conversations. I worked at a school district that had a huge disproportionality issue. They were suspending Black male students at a much higher rate than everyone else. They were graduating at a much lower rate. I was on an equity team, and NYU came in to work with us. So I've had these conversations that were completely not beer related, but specific to race. I ran a club for male minority students at that school district, trying to empower them, bringing in guest speakers who look like them to talk about different professions, how they got to where they were, job fairs, college tours, all that kind of stuff. So I have done this a lot in this academic, very comfortable setting, because that's my job. And I have not done that with the beer stuff at all. And actually, and again, to give Matt credit, even with that Blackout Tuesday, I woke up, I had a video posted, and I saw on Facebook his thing was blacked out. I got on Instagram, his thing was blacked out. I'm like, what's this all about? I researched. I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize this was a thing until Matt had done that twice. And then I took my video down, and I also did that. And I think that was a good thing for people to do, certainly. But I think doing something like this, is much more in depth, much more kind of, actually, to give Matt a third props right now, my brain went to like, should we try to get, people of color on this live stream to have this conversation? And he's like, yeah, that's a thing. And obviously, I agree 100%. We'll get into more later. Like he said, you want to listen, but also I think it's good to just show people like, have this conversation, no matter who you are, like have this conversation. This conversation needs to happen. If you have people, if you're a white person, you have people who have different life experiences than you, listen to them right now for sure. But even if your circle is white people, have these conversations. And again, have these uncomfortable, tough conversations for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, so. Listen, it's a hard enough thing to have a conversation between us, but it's also equally as hard to actually kind of reach people and actually try to get a point across that's positive. Try to get a point across that actually helps. There's people, unfortunately, there's people in the world that think the conversation we're having is going to be stupid. There's going to be people in the comments saying, "Sick to beer. I don't want to talk about politics." Well, it's not fucking politics. It's fucking humanity we're talking about here. We're not talking about fucking, you know what I mean, like left versus right, up versus down. We're talking about human life versus fucking evil to a certain extent. So, whether you come into this thinking we don't have a voice in this to talk about it, or whether you take something from it and it works, well, however it moves you, that's fine. We just felt like we needed to have the conversation because we feel like we're the kind of people that really need to have the conversation. And if one human decides to have a conversation based off of this and it helps, then I guess it helps in general. And I guess that's kind of both our kind of takes from it. Now, let's just actually get into it, because this could actually, we could flirt with this becoming like a 5-hour stream, and I just don't want that to happen. Let's talk about our history growing up, as far as who we are and how we grew up in our upbringing when it comes to like race and racism. Do you want to flip for who goes first, or
I can go. Yeah, I think like a lot of white people, I became aware of race through other people's lens. Like it wasn't something I had to think about ever. I didn't experience it. I didn't have to worry about it. Living in America. And the first time, at least that I can remember, that I was made aware of it was in 6th grade when my friend was like, "Hey, can my friend Tony sleep over?" My mom's like, "Yeah, it's fine." And Tony was biracial, or he still is biracial, and he slept over. And when his mom picked him up afterwards, she made a point to say to my mom, "He's never been invited to a sleepover." I assume where I grew up is some of other places, but like by 6th grade, a lot of kids have sleepovers. And it was kind of like the first time I was like, oh, why wouldn't, as my mom was telling me, like, why wouldn't he be invited to sleepovers? Like, it just wasn't a thing I had ever needed to think about. And then going back to the history thing, I remember in college that one of those like watershed, changed my perception. I knew I was going to be a teacher, and I was in an American history class. It was taught by a black professor, Dr. Felix Armfield, and I was sitting next to a black guy all semester. And halfway through, the professor surveyed the class. What do you like? What do you not like? What do we do that works for you? What would you like to see me tweak, et cetera, et cetera? And when I got to this guy I was sitting next to, he's like, I like how you, and I still remember how he phrased it, I like how you sprinkle some black pepper into American history. I've never heard it, where I was seen. And it just clicked. I was like, I've never sat in an American history class and not felt like I was unseen, And for this guy and he was probably one of those people who was going back to school. He was definitely older than I was. So like the guy, let's say he was 30, and I was probably 19. Just the fact that guy went to the age of 30, learning about his country's history, he never felt like he saw himself in that. It was just one of those things that was like, wow. And then, just you try to be aware of it. You see things sometimes, you don't see things. You try to listen always. And then, Matt alluded to this before, I am married to a black woman, my kids are biracial. So, the listening thing, it's actually happened 3 times since George Floyd, where she thought I was annoyed because of my facial expression as she was, just talking. And I'm like, no, I have nothing to say. Like, I'm listening to your thoughts and your feelings, and I want to fix the world for you, and I can't. And I was helpless in those moments, and apparently the face I was making all 3 times was just one of she thought an annoyance, and it wasn't at her. It was just like, I can't, I mean, something like this, obviously I can do, or like when I'm in the classroom trying to, educate the future, sure, but like, I can't make this world love you the way I do. So there's a little bit about what brought me to today and doing this, as I try not to choke up more.
Yeah, I mean, and when you're talking about that I guess it was a student not hearing those things, or like
Yeah,
the what?
yeah, he was,
But like, what? When was that?
So it would have been like 2002, 2003.
Okay, so that's it's one of those things where it's like, and you went to college. How old were you then?
So I would have been 19.
Okay. So yeah, man, like for me, it's like, it's a weird thing because like, especially since all this went down, the other word that really kind of caught my eye and that I read a bunch of times and heard a bunch of times, and it's in the title of this too, is the blind spot thing, where it's like, it's enough to want to have the conversation. It's enough to actually want to be open about changing the world and trying to be positive and try to talk about things in a positive light. But it's also, you have to be introspective, and you have to look at yourself, and you have to not only be able to be like, am I racist? Am I in any form or fashion? Because it can be like, someone could be like, I'm not racist, but in their brain they think, oh, I'm not that racist. You know what I mean? But so it's about taking yourself and looking at yourself and being open-minded enough to, one, be able to see yourself as being that, or two, being open-minded enough to ask people questions and be like, what do you think of me? Because there might be things that you don't even know about yourself, because you perceptually don't even see these things. And that's been a lot of what I've been like what do you want, whatever you want to call it, soul searching, like inner looking inside, all those kind of things, is a lot of what I've been doing as of late. It's been watching, reading, absorbing, and then looking inward, because you can't try to do good things until I believe you're a good person, and you have to have a good foundation yourself to really try to do these things. And one of the things I looked at was my upbringing, and I honestly, and I have to sit down with my brothers and sisters and really have a conversation. It's very hard right now with COVID, and we're all spread out and about, and you know what I mean, we're going through a bunch of stuff personally in our family outside of all this stuff, and that it's just hard to have this conversation. But I want to have this conversation because I genuinely don't remember having any kind of racism growing up in my family. And it's really, but here's the thing. I grew up, I was born in the mid 70s. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I grew up in a predominantly white area of New Jersey, then moved to an even more whiter area of Pennsylvania. So to be that kind of, okay, I'm not, is it kind of, I don't want to just dismiss it that easily. Growing up, I don't remember. My dad passed away recently, and I've done a ton of like reflection and just remembering him, and so I was already preloaded with a lot of memory. You know what I mean? Because it's been a lot of like reminiscing, picture looking, and all those kind of things you do when someone passes away. And I honestly do not remember my dad ever making a racist comment in his life. And honestly, it's like my mom either. And I honestly, I was kind of blown away by it, because I've never thought about it. Like, I've never thought about it. I just assume so, because, where I grew up in the Pocono Mountains, northeastern Pennsylvania, predominantly kind of hillbilly stuff, I saw my fair share of racism. You know what I mean? It wasn't rampant, but you also have to understand that, like, in my, when I went to school, where I went to school from middle school to high school, if we had less than 10 people of color. I remember 2 individual black students, a couple Latino students, and a couple Asian students, but we're less than a handful of people of color in a class that graduates 300 people. You know what I mean? So you're talking about a good 1,000 people in a high school. That's how many people we had of color. So I saw and I heard, and I didn't do much because peer pressure, and you're a kid and you don't know what to do, and you're afraid and things like that. You hear stuff, but it's it's one of those things where I was blown away by it. And my sister, like I said, my dad never said anything. My mom, and I said this in the lead up video this morning that I posted. Not that it means anything, but my mom's biggest crush her whole life was Montel Williams, the talk show host. It was like she would constantly be like, "He's the sexiest man I've ever seen in my life." You know what I mean? So when you combine that with never hearing anything racist, I just assumed, you know what I mean, that it is what it is. I'm lucky like that. I was born in a genetic lottery, born in a birth lottery like that. Like I could have been easily born in some family that could have been bigoted and racist. So it was weird for me growing up as a child in that sense, because I didn't think about it that way. Now, when I moved on to college, I didn't go to college long, but obviously your horizons expanding. You start to kind of, mingle with a lot more people of color. But I was only at college for a couple years, and then I left and immediately went into an industry. As I worked in the tattoo and body modification industry, which is inherently open-minded. Like it's actually it's weirdly opposite. In the tattoo and body modification, like body piercing, stuff like that industry, you're either super open-minded or you're overtly racist. There's no middle ground there. You know what I mean? Like it's you're either a Nazi skinhead or you're just a good person. Like, and obviously there's always bad apples and there's shitty people everywhere, but for the grand portion of it. And then, that was in 1998 when I really kind of started in that industry. And then once I moved from that industry on to, during that industry, I started moving in the music industry. Once you move in the music industry, it's even more wide open when it comes to kind of race and culture and things like that. So it's weird because for all where I grew up and how I grew up, there should have been some form or fashion of some kind of learned racism, but it just never happened. I don't know if it's just because of me or because of I chose to ignore it or I chose not to participate. I don't know what it is. But it's one of those things where when we get to today and we talk about today and we talk about it because it's been present the whole time, yeah. I genuinely have a hard time even like understanding it to a point where I feel like Mugatu and fucking Zoolander, like I'm taking crazy pills. Like, why are people like this? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, why are people fucking doing this? Like, I genuinely don't understand it. Like, I don't. Now, as a history teacher, like, what's your background? Do you cover everything? Are you just like a social studies teacher, history teacher, or do you specify in specific?
Social studies.
Okay.
Yeah, in New York we call it social studies. And the way New York's set up is you do global 9 and 10, and then in 11th grade you do U.S., and then senior year you do participation in government, half a year in economics, the other half. I've taught it all. So I've done the world perspective, I've done the United States perspective, I've done the government and the economic side. And it's not my job to indoctrinate, it's my job to educate, right? So I just, in a class like a government class, if you give me one side, I just tell you what the other side would say and vice versa. I'm always challenging. But in actual straight history classes, there are things that are factual, there are things where we have sources, and then we look at the sources. Well, what do you think actually happened in this time period based on these sources? And there's a lot of, and you see it like with social media and things like that, you want to check, accuracy, you want to check reliability. So that's like, and I do applaud New York State. I don't agree with everything they do top down, but they are trying to focus more on like looking at documents, does the author have a bias, like being aware of those things, which I think will translate well to all these people being on the internet and just absorbing little memes that could or could not be factual, and that's silly. But yeah, you definitely have opportunities to educate, and it's good.
Yeah, I guess we have to go to comments for a little bit just to see what's going on.
Yeah.
Because it took. I'm going to skip a bunch of the early one, guys, because you guys are sitting around waiting for us to actually come on the air, and we'll just dive in. And we have a bunch of people saying, you know what I mean, like, okay, I'm looking good. Patience is a virtue when it comes to all this kind of stuff. Kyle, turn up your mic, and I turned it up, and the volume was like crazy high for a bit, but then I fixed it, so that's very nice. We have people chiming in. Jay Porter says everyone has a voice, which they do. And then Brian Nass actually brought up a comment right now, and he said, check out Weathered Souls Brewing, minority owned, started Blackest Beer Initiative. If you listen to Steal This Beer podcast, you just saw they posted that one yesterday, where they actually talked to one of the owners and the person that spearheaded that. He said almost 800 breweries signed up. I think it's well over 1,000 now to brew their stout. And they're, doing, it's much similar to All Together, but a little bit different tweaks. Kyle and I talked about this. We're going to probably rattle off a bunch of random points throughout all this. We'll try to put notes in the comments, post this video. That way, you know what I mean? We can, you guys can actually, actually look up some of the resources that we actually talked about. And then here's one of the things I actually wanted to talk about, or touch on with the comments, because it kind of gets into a point. We have Charles Boswell, which is, he's always in the comments. What's going on? He brings up Candace Owens, who is kind of like one of the more kind of right-leaning kind of people that kind of looked at the kind of, negatives, any negative you could possibly find about George Floyd, and kind of tried to beat him down from being a horrible choice of words, but probably appropriate choice of words at the same time, from being a pedestal, a martyr or something like that, and kind of talked about it. And I don't necessarily want to talk about Candace Owens in general, because, I mean, if you don't know she's a horrible person, that's up to you to decide. And if you don't think she is, then that's just you. But then someone actually asked the question, which is Eclipse Brewing, chimed in and said, do you think she is racist? And then followed it up with says, or Republican. And then shortly after, we have Gore Quill, Nacho Vidal chime in, the Republicans that ended slavery. That's the kind of the mindset, and that's the kind of the thinking that actually makes your point just bullshit. No, you shouldn't listen to a word that person writes after they write that, because saying the Republicans ended slavery, which means that everything's fine now, is the dumbest shit in the history of mankind. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of people that did very good things at one point in their life and then ended up being a bad thing. It's looking at an environment and the way things work as in a static vacuum that never changes. You know what I mean? That's not the case. You know what I mean? Like, the Republican Party of that time is nothing even close to what it was then as it is now, nor should it be. We've evolved a very long time in a very short time. We'll get on that in a little bit. Since that period of time. So to say something I did, you know what I mean, something that happened 200 years ago or 150 years ago should matter today. It should matter, but it shouldn't be expected to be the same sentiment. You know what I mean? Like, I forget what the analogy was. Someone actually wrote something in response to that, and I was kind of hoping I'd remember it while I was yammering into nothingness. But yeah, that point is just whatever. Anyway, back to the comments real quick, and then we'll keep on talking. I don't want to make this like a comment thing. We should just talk about this stuff on our own, but I feel weird if we actually don't address some of that stuff. So anyway, okay. So we kind of covered like our kind of upbringing when it comes to race and racism and stuff like that. And, I don't believe that I grew up nor were in a racist environment for pretty much my whole life. But I could be wrong, and we'll touch on that in a bit. But you're sounding like you're much the same. It was kind of like going into it, and you were hard pressed to believe that person really didn't hear any of their self and any of the history they were taught. Is there any of the things that you've learned over your years of teaching, of learning teaching, or teaching, or even over the past couple weeks of history that have blown you away? That you're like, I did not learn this in high school or even college to that standpoint.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I think, and I credit, and I'll say his name a second time, Dr. Felix Armfield. I did learn a lot of the stuff that's like these new discoveries that people are talking about. The Black Wall Street massacre. I've known about that for a while, for example. And that's like and it's important. People should know about it.
I found out about that only. I found out before all this happened, but it just happened to be on Stuff You Should Know podcast. Oh, they did a whole Tulsa race riots thing, and it's like literally I listened to the podcast, And it was in the Watchmen, you know what I mean? But really learned about it was like, or got the fire. I'm not a big comic book nerd like you, so I'm not going to sit here and say the Watchmen. But when I listened to the podcast, first thing I did was walk into my bedroom where my wife was, and I said, I have to tell you this story. I'm like, I never learned, and that was not too long. It was like less than a year ago I learned about it, and I'm like, how the fuck did I never learn about this? You know what I mean? And for those who don't know, just type it in. They're gonna call it the Tulsa race riots. There's a way more evil moniker than a riot, but basically, just like there was a rich area of Tulsa that, well, I should say an area of Tulsa where the predominant black area was wealthy, and like Kyle said, it was called Black Wall Street. And basically, for the lack of a better term, they used a very loose excuse to basically burn and kill thousands of people. Like, if you look up the records, it's like, oh, like 70 people died. No, it's like, they say it's probably anywhere between like 1,000 to 3,000 people died. And they were like, the National Guard came in and like bombed like helped the civilians bomb a neighborhood and burn it to the ground. It's insane. And you... raise your hand if you've never heard about that up until the past couple weeks. What else?
Yeah.
Was there? I mean, you go ahead. You keep going. You're the history teacher. You're better off doing this stuff than me.
No, yeah, I mean that was crazy, and like none of the insurance companies paid, so like people were just homeless because their houses were blown up, burned down, and I mean, yeah, it was devastating to a very wealthy area, and it's not the only thing like that that's happened. That's just the most famous one. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to act like I've always known everything, but I think a lot of the stuff I see going around social media, I have been aware of. Just again, there's a fantastic book. I grabbed 2 books to show. This isn't one of them because I lost this one when my basement flooded last summer. But James Lowen's "Lies My Teacher Told Me: Everything Your American History Textbook Got Wrong." That's a good book for history teachers to read, and I've read it several times. But just some of those things where it's like, oh, I did not learn this history, or like, why didn't I learn this history? And I try to be very full. Here's a good example, right? Like, as much as I teach about Thomas Jefferson owning slaves because I think that's important, I also mention, like Martin Luther King Jr. plagiarized his doctorate. To me, the bigger lesson is people, and you said this earlier, similarly. People are complicated. Sometimes people do really amazing things like write the Declaration of Independence, and then sometimes those same people do horrific things like own slaves. Sometimes people do these amazing things like fight for civil rights. Sometimes people do things that you're not supposed to do, like plagiarize your doctorate. So I think that's a better life lesson is, no one's perfect. You should not feel inferior. You can do these things, and everyone messes up, and then try to make a life lesson out of it while teaching the history. I have a core curriculum I have to get through, and then I try to, make sure students know these other kinds of things because I don't want them growing up to be idiots, right? Like, that's kind of my goal. And it goes pretty well, I think.
Was there anything specific over the past couple weeks that you learned yourself that you didn't know previously? I mean, as a history teacher, that's a hard pull because that's your job. That's what you do. So I'm not. If you didn't, that's okay. You're okay to say I don't because that's what I do for a living.
Here's something I didn't have a chance to look it up today. I saw it sounded familiar, but I don't know it about Central Park, and that had been a predominantly well-to-do black community that was taken out of there to build Central Park. I haven't seen if that's true or not, but I saw that today. If that stuff's true, I don't know about that, but I haven't done any independent research yet.
Yeah, I mean, all the big ones, like what I was taught in high school was for what I remember, because there might have been stuff I missed, so I don't want to throw my alma mater under the bus completely. But based off of what I remember, it was the typical. I learned about Martin Luther King. I learned, and now when I say learned, I mean I know his name and that he tried to do good stuff. You know what I mean? Like base stuff. You know what I mean? Like I learned about. I don't even think they taught us about Malcolm X. I think I learned that all post high school, maybe. See, and I'm trying to think. So much of it I didn't learn, but I ended up learning later. And there's been a lot of stuff that I personally just learned over out of curiosity, whether it be, you know what I mean, about like the Black Panthers, which I've learned quite a bit more over the past, you know what I mean, a couple years, but I knew more about them than most, you know what I mean, trying to learn about things like, you know, about Medgar Evers, and trying to learn about like some of the other big kind of you know, rights activists outside of Martin Luther King, because it was basically like almost like Martin Luther King was like, here's your rights activist, that's him, and it's like, yeah, it's not one person. The Emmett Till I kind of knew about a little bit. I believe I learned that in college, but I've learned way more about it. And for those that don't know, if you haven't heard, it's one of the bigger ones also, but it's Emmett Till was like accused of whistling at a white woman, and he was basically just beaten and thrown in a river and killed and stuff like that. But it was one of the more seminal moments in kind of Black history when it comes to like negative things happening, and to the point where the girl who actually said he whistled on her deathbed said she didn't, like she actually admitted to that didn't happen. But that
the guys admitted to it after the trial, and they were found innocent, and they admitted to doing it.
Who was? Oh yeah, that's right. The two guys that killed him said we did it afterwards, right? And not just they said they did it. They said they did it in a magazine, like a publication. And back then it was double, because we still have double. We still have double jeopardy, but you couldn't do that today. I don't think you could do that. Like you can't just get acquitted, could you? And then be like, I did it. Does that still exist? Oh.
The Constitution.
I guess it depends on how much money and whatever you have. But
the thing, yeah, I mean they used barbed wire and tied them to a giant piece
fan
of a cotton gin.
Yeah, fan from a cotton gin. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when they did find his body, the state told his mother, "You have to have a closed casket."
She refused,
funeral, and she's like, "Nope." The world can't see my boy. And then they took pictures, and they were in Jet and Ebony magazine, or maybe just Jet. But a lot of black publications, newspapers, and stuff like that kind of run it.
Yeah. Look it up. You can find it on the internet. Go look at the picture. Like look at it. Then usually you're just like, it's kind of shitty looking. I don't know if you want to go look at it. It's kind of a little bit squeamish. No, go look at that fucking picture. You know what I mean? Like you owe it at minimum to look at that picture and then see how horrific that shit is. You know what I mean? And like one of the podcasts I listened to recently is and this is one of my favorite ones. It's short, but there's a lot of information in it. One of the people I've been following as of late, and he clued me in some stuff I didn't know, was that I mentioned it earlier, Bakari Sellers, he was ex-congressman from, where was he from? Democratic congressman, I believe, House of Representatives from South Carolina, and he's been doing a lot of speaking as of late. Look at me, kind of messing up everything so people can't see what's going on. Anyway, he make sure everything's back to normal before I can before that actually works. Oh, there you go. I'm just watching our live feed now to make sure it actually goes back to us being on the video feed. Okay. Because I'm using this new software. Anyway, and he's been doing a lot of speaking. He did a podcast with a guy by the name of Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons is he's a kind of a sports writer, but he's more of a kind of like culture podcaster guy nowadays. He's pretty much one of the original podcast guys. He used to work for ESPN. Now he has his own thing called The Ringer, which is basically a podcast network about culture in America and things like that. And he did a podcast with him talking about it. And I'm going to rip off a bunch of stuff from there because it's just amazing, the stuff that I learned in such a short period. It's like only a 25-minute listen, and I learned so much about it. And he talks about it, the way he reflects on a lot of the stuff that's going on, like he, refers to racism for black people as more like never-ending grief, not like a horrific event. It's just like constant grief. Like imagine someone you love dying every day. That's kind of what it's like to live. He uses one of the older kind of activists. He used to be part of the Black Panther Party. He uses Stokely Carmichael, I guess. He uses one of his own analogies and talks about racism. And I never thought about racism this way. And it's really interesting, and he's paraphrasing to a point, but he's just trying to hammer the point home. And he's like, because he said, I have to explain racism because most people don't understand what racism is. And he's like, racism is if you hate me because of my race, that's a you problem. He's like, if you could, if you have the power to do something to me about my race, that's a me problem. So it's more like individualistic hate and whatnot is always going to be part and parcel of humanity. Unfortunately, it's going to be there, but it's the ability to have that happen without repercussion from, you know what I mean, that ends up being the bigger sticking point. Because if someone don't like you, a lot of people don't like me, and I'm cool with it. But if someone don't like me and they can actually physically hurt me or harm me or my family, then that becomes a much bigger problem. And I think that's kind of like a different aspect, a different way I've been actually kind of viewed it through that I never viewed it before. And then he goes on to say his father was one of the more he was an activist back in the day, and he talked about there was it was called like the Orangeburg Massacre. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one. To where there was back in, I'm gonna get the dates wrong here, but I want to say back in like it's post, I guess you would say post Jim Crow era, or right around the end of Jim Crow era, or right in Jim Crow era stuff. It's his father. There was a group of people that were trying to register and get black people to vote down south, and 2 people went missing. And his father went down there to find them, and they ended up being murdered because they were going door to door to try to get black Americans voting. And they had a protest, and then in that protest, the cops killed or shot like something like 20 people and ended up killing 3 people, but like 20 people were shot. All students doing a peaceful protest, and all 9 officers were tried. All 9 officers were acquitted, and his dad was one of the people that was shot that lived, and he's the first and only. He says this in a podcast. He's like his dad was charged and convicted of inciting a riot, and went to jail for that. And he was the only person who went to jail and brought up on charges. So he's literally the only man in the history of the United States to start a one-man riot. You know what I mean? Like that, and that's the thing. Like, and eventually, years later, he was like pardoned and everything was expunged and all that stuff. He refused to have it expunged. Actually, he's like, I want it on there. You know what I mean? But it's like learning those kind of things and like hearing about these atrocities that shaped the United States. You know what I mean? The way it is. Here's a big one. I didn't know if you knew this. This is something crazy that I learned, and I read a paper from Princeton about the other day. And it blew me away. This is the shit that's blowing me away. And I thought I was educated. And this is the whole point of this, is that even if you think you know shit, go. Yeah. Nazi Germany exists because of racist America? I did not know that.
Okay. Any more information?
Okay, so this is true. I mean, listen, I've read 4 papers on it, and all of them were for were Princeton EDU. You know what I mean? They were from universities. Yeah. Basically, when Nazi Germany, and I want to tie this into something because I think that there's a point to be made about Nazi Germany and racism in America. Not necessarily that they're the exact same thing, but so Nazi Germany before Nazi Germany was Germany. We're kind of envious of Jim Crow U.S. and they wanted that. There's a sect of people that wanted that in Germany, because you're talking about systematic racism existed well before Nazi Germany. You know what I mean? In the United States, so they viewed and saw the racist United States. They viewed Jim Crow United States and go, we really kind of want that here. But their problem is, and this is coming from the paper, so it's kind of like, it is what it is. But they're like, the problem we see with the American racism is that the person they're fighting, which is the African American, the black folk, are most across the board, because of black people coming from slavery, they're mostly disenfranchised. They're mostly poor. They're mostly living in bad circumstances. So they already have them at an advantage. Whereas the Germans felt like the Jewish people were wealthy and smart and wise, and they had to be much more aggressive and much more violent in order to make what they wanted happen. So literally the blueprint for Nazi Germany came from the United States, which is insane.
That's crazy.
And I'll say,
I mean, there was definitely American sympathizers, but I didn't consider that.
It was the opposite. And I'll, like I said, we'll post notes and links to all this stuff after we're done. It might not come up right after the video's done. We'll take a while. And we'll add on it over the next couple days. I'll probably re-listen and see if, okay, I missed that. I need to add a note. I need to add a reference and stuff like that. But it's like hearing things like that is just like I would have never thought that. And it's legitimate cited sources. It's not like someone's like, I have a theory that this is why this happened. You know what I mean? It's legitimate, like A, B, C kind of stuff. And those are the kind of things like I would have never ever known that unless this happened.
Yeah.
It took the
education. Yeah, I mean, you made a point to educate yourself.
Not even just that. It took the whole world, because you can't take the pandemic and push it off to the side. It took the whole world to stop. No sports, no nothing. Everybody has to sit and be quiet. And then when somebody gets murdered, then we'll pay attention. Be like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? There's racism going on? You know what I mean? Like, no shit, Sherlock. And then it took that pause, that breath, to sit there and actually have to listen. You know what I mean? Because before, American Idol will be on, or the Super Bowl, or whatever. No, and there's noise. People can block it out. You don't have to listen to it. But now you have to listen to it. And that's a good thing. If you're going to make lemonades out of lemon kind of thing, there is the ultimate goal of all of this is something good comes out of it. But it took that for me to myself, who I think I'm progressive. I think I'm trying to be a good person. For me to go out and learn new things, it takes that. I don't even know what to say half the time. Like, the more I talk about it, the more I just get, like, frustrated and sad at the same time.
It is nice. A majority, I just saw this today, it was a Fox News poll. Usually the majority of people care about this topic. Like, right now, they're like, yeah, this is the Black Lives Matter. Like, we need this happening. We need to learn about it, So it's at hopefully a point of critical mass where people are like, yeah, enough people care and want to learn and want to, be better, and that's amazing. And, I hope that momentum continues even as more distractions pop back up into our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just reading the comments. We got somebody in there trying to be an asshole. Anyway, so we're gonna tie this in the beer a little bit. I mean, it's a little bit heavy duty. Do you have anything else to kind of add on to all that shit I just threw down, or do you just want to kind of move on? Because I don't even know what to say. I mean, the grand scheme of things is we're just trying to bring up information. I don't know even what to do. We probably should have structured this better, but I don't think I could structure it any better than I could now, because every time I talk about this, my brain goes in 19 different directions.
Yeah, I mean, that we have. You mentioned earlier about, like, we don't want this to be 5 hours. I mean, if we wanted to cover everything that's happened up until this point, we'd have how many college classes of this information, how many volumes of books that have at this point. I mean, and I talked a little bit about how this hits me, but here, let me show you one of the books I wanted to show.
Okay.
I think it's a pretty short book. And I think it just kind of, if you're a white person like me, I think it gives you it's a well-written, easy to read. On my screen, Matt, I'm flipped. Is it showing the right way?
No, it looks right. Looks fine to me.
Okay, cool. I mean, he's an amazing author. He's written several books. He writes for The Atlantic. He writes a run of Black Panther for Marvel, because I'm a dork. Got to throw that out there. But this is just, I think it's he's a fantastic writer, but it's also accessible. I would highly recommend people read this book. I went through our library. There's a lot at our house, but there's a lot of books I wanted to mention. But I just thought this was very accessible. I would encourage anyone who wants to kind of dive in, just maybe start here. It's not a history book. It's a personal, it's like a narrative kind of someone else's life kind of a book. But, and definitely history teacher alert, delve into the history for sure. But, that's a good jumping off point, in my opinion.
Well, let's do this because again, like if we're we can sit here and cover history, like you said, and talking
Yeah,
points
yeah.
and all that stuff. The ultimate goal is us to give you a little bit of that information so you can go out and learn for yourself and want to learn these things. Kyle has a book here. I'll probably post a couple of things that I thought was interesting to read and stuff like that in the comments. Let's steer this back to personal because that's what we can talk about most emphatically is what we know and how we've experienced stuff. So before we get into the beer stuff, I actually wanted to ask, how long ago did you meet your wife?
We met about 7 years ago.
Okay.
And we've been married 5 years.
How'd you meet? Just out of curiosity.
We met on Match, actually.
I met.
Although randomly I worked with her sister.
Okay.
But yeah, her sister did not set us up.
Okay. I met my wife online too, so it's okay. Anyway, so the getting back into beer, because we're gonna steer this slightly into beer conversation, because that's what we do here. What was beer? How diverse was beer when you got into beer? Because for me, it was not that diverse.
Yeah, it definitely was not diverse. It was I don't remember a lot or any like overtly like let's keep it that way, but also I don't remember any like how do we diversify it, those conversations either. Um I through time have met different people who like craft beer, but that was not normal for a while. And I have some stories about that, certainly. But yeah, how about? I mean, I assume the same thing for you, right? I mean, just
Yeah, I mean, like I got into beer in the late '90s, early 2000s. So like, and when I say diversity, I don't mean like actually like in the industry itself. Like, I mean, predominantly beer even today is dudes that look like me. You know what I mean? More than diverse people, and there's more women, more people of color in beer, stuff like that now. And we drank Brooklyn beer, so while he wasn't an owner, Garrett Oliver's been at Brooklyn for forever. So it's not like, and it was funny because when you talked about, I talked about drinking this beer, which is from Montclair Brewing, which is a black-owned brewery in New Jersey. You said, yeah, I'm probably just gonna end up getting something from Brooklyn because I can't find anything by me, and I legitimately forgot about Garrett as a kind of Mount Rushmore status in beer, not and I not because I'm like, oh, I forgot he was black. I'm just like, oh my god, I'm Garrett Oliver. I don't view him that way just because he's been here forever. Anyway, but like the one cool thing, and this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but the one cool thing is I don't remember tap rooms and breweries to a certain extent. Listen, you're talking about the late 90s, early 2000s. There wasn't many breweries you can go and sit and drink beer at. Most of the beer I was consuming at that time was either at home or was at a good beer bar, which were even few and far between to begin with then. But back then, it was very few and far between to see someone of color. Not out of the ordinary, not like 0%, but very out of the ordinary. But now it's the exact opposite. You know what I mean? Sure, it's 9 times out of 10. I shouldn't say 9 times out of 10. 6.5, 7 times out of 10, it's going to be a bearded white dude. A bearded white dude, but it's getting closer to reflecting the actual percentage of the population. Is how I look at it. So you wouldn't expect, if you walked into a tap room in Podunk, middle of nowhere, and there was 80 people in there, and all 80 were people of color, you'd be like, this is weird. Not because it's weird to be around people of color. Be like, why? Like that, the percentages are off. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where now when I go to breweries or tap rooms, it's not so much an oddity. Not that I looked at it as an oddity even back then, but now it's just more of the same. How has that changed for you?
Yeah, so this will mostly get to that, plus just some things I kind of want to make sure I touched upon. So, like, and we've had this conversation, I forget on camera, off camera, but like for me, it was Omegang, Ithaca. Those were like the local breweries back when I got into craft beer. Now there's so many I could throw a rock and hit one, but like back then I'd have to travel like 45 minutes, an hour to get to a local craft brewery. Back in those days, yeah, I mean, it was, as you mentioned about diversity, even like women, or like it wasn't just like a wife being, dragged there, like, oh, my husband wants to go to a brewery today, versus today where you do see more male female, for example. You definitely, and I live in a city, so it's a little easier to start seeing more diversity based on skin color, ethnicity, etc. But yeah, I mean, I guess this is gonna part of what I want to talk about is going to be some of the like what you can do stuff. So I won't get into that right now. But like speaking of Omegang, I remember my wife and I've done this at a couple beer fests where essentially we're like counting the non-white people because it's just like there's not that many. And then like I remember we were at Omegang for Belgium comes to Cooperstown, and like she walked up to maybe 3 or 4 black guys. She's like, "Oh, this is where all the black guys are hanging out." And like they didn't miss a beat. That, to me, this is the more important part of the story. Like they didn't miss a beat of like, "Oh yeah," like they just started joking back with her immediately because they were thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
Like I know when they saw my wife, they're like, "Oh, it's another black person," and like because it was that rare at that event. Um, so like we've definitely seen that. I remember in Albany where we currently live, the first beer fest we went to, doing the same thing, and we started counting like security. Oh yeah, there's a guy. He's bringing in kegs. Maybe he works at the brewery. Maybe like, and it was like 6 at the beer fest. So like, and I think this has definitely shaped my worldview a little bit. Is when you're a white person sitting next to a black person doing anything, you notice things maybe you wouldn't notice. You're watching TV and you're like, this show doesn't have any black people. Like it's just kind of like a little bit more obvious because you're confronted with it. You're in that headspace more than when I was a white person living alone. I never thought about that when I was watching TV. And now it's like, oh yeah, this movie. Oh, there is okay. Yep, there's a black character in the background. I guess that's something. And there's better diversity in a lot of entertainment. That's I'm not trying to paint too broad with that, but like you go to to tie it back to beer. Like it is nice, and it's one reason she wanted to live in a city, because like there's a better chance if we go to a nice beer bar, we're going to see people who look like her, and that she'll feel more comfortable, and they know she's welcome. Or if people are working there, and she's like, oh well, the owners are willing to hire people who look like me. Obviously, this is a place I can feel comfortable, which I know kind of bleeds into like things people can do to make the situation better in craft beer, but then I've met, like one really good friend and one, pretty good friend, both black guys. And yeah, it was just like striking up conversations at a brewery. And it wasn't specifically skin color. It was just like, oh, they're just by themselves. Like, and we're saying next to each other at the bar, what's up? And like the one guy he owned a restaurant. He had an amazing tap list at his restaurant. So we started going there. My wife randomly knew him. We ended up doing our rehearsal dinner there. Like he was like already a good friend of both of ours when we met. But like, yeah, just I don't know. I guess it's getting a little bit more into what you can do. Just be nice to people. But yeah, I don't know.
I mean, we can move on to that. We can move on to what can be done. I mean, we can move on to what can be done in the beer world, and then move on to what can be done or should be done moving forward outside of that. I mean, you touched on it already, and it's again, some people have done it already. Fremont Brewing has done it. Tired Hands, I believe, does it, and it's a bunch of it. You could watch that or listen to that podcast from Steal This Beer, the Weathered Souls one with Marcus from Weathered Souls, is internships, paid internships. Like one of the big things is there's a lack of black ownership when it comes to any business, whether it be the NFL sees it. Vast proportion of the players are of color, but yet there are no black ownership in the NFL. And the same thing kind of trickles down when it comes to beer, because a good portion of the people that actually have ownership in breweries and things like that are dudes that look like me again. Now that it's not a magic thing where you click your fingers and everything gets repaired, but one of the talking points that Augie was talking about in his podcast this week was having a kind of paid internship initiative for basically learning, because it's kind of one of those things where, and you see this in the real world quite a bit, is that you need 5 years experience to apply here, but well, if I can't work there and get the experience, how am I going to get 5 years experience? And it's much the same in brewing, to where it's like, okay, they're starting an initiative at Carton to where they're going to, hire somebody and give them 6 months experience, 3 years brewing, 2 years marketing, sales, and then 1 year tap room. And it'd be like, well, at the end of it, in a perfect world, we'd hire you. But if we don't, at least you now have 6 years of experience. Yeah. It's a teach a fish, feed a fish kind of thing going on. And that is, in beer, is probably the most important thing, is that given the opportunity, because I could say right now, hands down, that if I were to think off the top of my head, I know, besides Garrett, besides the owner of Omnipolo, besides some of the owners of beers. But I mean, someone I know, like someone I know and I've interacted with in my life, I probably only know a very small handful of people of color in the brewing industry, personally.
Yeah.
One would be Will from Equilibrium. The other one would be my one buddy's a distributor rep for 12% Beer Project. But that's about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's very few and far between. And a lot of people, you know, would say, you know, it's one of those things where you'd have those other, I don't know how to say it. Some people would say, well, you know, they hire the best person for the job. Why does it matter? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And I think if you say those kind of things, you totally just don't understand the point to begin with. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like a defense mechanism against hiring that way. It'd be like, well, I hired the best person possible, and be like, did you? Did you really? Or you're just using it as an excuse, you know, to do that. And I think that's where it starts, is giving the opportunity. Not saying, here's free shit for everybody to go, oh, you want to work here? You can work here and do whatever you want. No, it's like, okay, I give you the opportunity. If you want it, you take it, you earn it, you work, you make a life out of it. You just can't slack and do nothing, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the most important thing, first and foremost.
Yeah. The access to opportunity, the equity versus equality. I mean, all that. These are, you know, huge parts of it. I used to get, when I mentioned this earlier, when I ran that, I'm at a different school district now, but in my old school district, when I ran that club for male students of color, every once in a while I'd get pushback from someone in the community, you know, someone in the school district, whatever, like, well, where's the whites only club? And the point I would always say is, listen, I have a lot of thoughts, but just look at it this way. You know, at that school district, 20% of students were Black, Hispanic, or biracial. The school district employees were less than 1% non-white. So, like, I would just say, like, listen, these kids come to a school. There's, at the high school I worked at, there was one Black person, my sister-in-law, and she's a social worker. So if the kid didn't need to see the social worker, they probably didn't know she existed. So they just go through their whole day seeing white professionals all day long, white professionals. What I'm trying to do is show these guys people who look like them who are professionals. And after I explain it like that, these people pushing back were always like, I get it. Okay, we're fine. All I want, and then I would also get sometimes pushback like, well, are you going to quit your job so a Black person can have your job? This is what I want, is whatever the percentage of people are in the country, you see roughly that in all industry. That's my goal. And I'm not advocating, you know, everyone quits their job or whatever.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying about what Augie's doing. And, you know, I do listen to podcasts. I haven't listened to that episode yet. But that's the kind of stuff you need to do in all kinds of industries. And some, you know, are ahead of the game. I know, like STEM, you know, is pretty proactive with trying to, you know, diversify. If I say, you know, close your eyes and picture an engineer, you're probably thinking a white male or an Asian American male or a person in Asia who's a male. Like, you don't, you know, if you have these preconceived notions. So there's a, you know, big push to get more women into STEM, you know, into things like engineering, people of color, certainly. And you have to provide opportunities for that access, and that's just a reality. And then, like you said, I mean, you try to give them internships or opportunities for work experience, and they are qualified, then hopefully they do get hired. And then you do, at some point, just people are getting hired, and it's all good. And racists are, you know, even more of a minority group. That's my goal anyway.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about the grander scheme of things, because I think in the end, what happens outside of beer is going to affect beer to begin with, so it's not necessarily a beer-based problem. Sure. Is that, like, well, let's talk about this instead of talk about what we think, or just saying, how do I want to phrase this? What do you think would be the most important steps moving forward to make, because I have a really fucking controversial take on this, and I think it may anger some people, so I'll let you go first. But what do you think we need to do in the country to make shit better? To help. You know what I mean? Like not, how do you make it better? And it's a loaded question. You know what I mean? Like, super loaded, but, like, what do you think?
Yeah. I think people are, and we've talked about this several times already. You think what you think, you you live in a bubble. You don't want to educate yourself. It's easy to have one talking point. I'm on this side of the political spectrum. Here's my one talking point about how to fix this thing. There's never, like, we talk about these big complicated issues. There's not one fix. It's going to be a combination of things that need to happen. So we already talked about access, opportunities. That has to happen more openly for all people, obviously, to have access to, whether it's schooling, job opportunities, internships, to get those jobs. So you need to try to figure out a better way to do, financial education inequalities. I mean, certainly it's something I've witnessed in my, 13 years of being in education. Better policies, just, and something we're doing now is, I mean, people need to speak up. People need to be cool. It's something I teach my students on the first day of school and the last day of school, and I'll tell everyone out there as well. I'm a grown man, and I still live by the golden rule. Like, you just treat people the way you want to be treated, and it just needs to be more of that. People are so selfish and just what gets me mine, and it's like, okay, yeah, that to a point or whatever, but like, if you're stepping on a bunch of other people to get there. So I definitely think just trying to put yourself in other people's shoes. Anyone who's watching this who's like, F these guys, they're a bunch of, libtard idiot, blah, 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 whatever. Like, just stop. Just listen. Just for a day. I saw, talking about Candace Owen, we talked about it before. I watched that clip twice of her talking. I don't agree with her, but I listened twice. I try to get outside my bubble. I wanted to hear this side, hear what her points were. Just listen. Yeah. What's your controversial take?
Well, before that, because I keep forgetting that I'm actually clicking off onto browsers, research and stuff, and I keep forgetting that this actually, it's following what I'm clicking on. So people just saw me searching for something specific, and there was and this is actually pretty interesting to talk about policy. And that's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about policy. And the reason why I was searching was there was a cop in Baltimore called Michael Wood Jr. You can go listen to a podcast he did on Joe Rogan. And he's basically an ex-Baltimore cop who actually talks about systematic racism in the police department, and how he himself was pretty much just ended up being a racist cop because it ended up being what he had to do in order to kind of live his job. And like about how he does it way more insightful, way more in depth than I could possibly talk about it. But the reason why people are going to get angry. So I think exactly what happened with the Nazification of Germany needs to happen here. That's kind of what I think has to happen in the United States, is that we need to take the same stance that Germany took after Nazi Germany in order to kind of take the same steps in order to kind of destroy what has been built up here in the United States. And that it started with policy, but not only policy, but policy makers. And that the people, you have to be able to get rid of the bad laws that have been skewed towards people of color, but also you need to get rid of the people that make those laws. Do you know what I mean? Like that, and that's part of the problem, is that the people who, you can't get rid of these issues with when the person driving the car is still at the helm. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it ends up being one of those things, and I don't want to associate this with Nazism or all that kind of stuff. I've mentioned a couple times in here. I'm not trying to say this is that and they're the same exact thing, but there's parallels to it, obviously. You know what I mean? As far as countries being, more kind of hateful towards certain people of color and ethnicity and whatnot. So I think it needs to be more a radical change in the people who create, write, and uphold the law, whether it be from the top level, from the government, from the Oval Office down to the people that patrol the streets and people that do enforce the laws as they're written, because it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over a week. It's not going to happen over a month. It's not going to happen over a year. And that's probably the biggest thing that is going to be the first hurdle that needs to be covered is the next month to 2 months. And that hurdle, I think, is not letting this moment become a moment. You know, not letting this initial groundswell of support and initial groundswell of good well wishing become a afterthought, become a past moment. You know, like one of the quotes that Bakari had in the one thing was, you know, he was talking about you know, things changing. You know, he talked about, you know, like you know, people that you would never think backing Black Lives Matter back. Black Lives Matter would be Mitt Romney or the NFL or those places that would never do those things. And then like yeah, but here's the other part that they actually talk about in that podcast is like all they said was Black Lives Matter. That's it. They didn't actually do anything. They just said the words, and that in and of itself is crazy. Yeah. But it's the sentence that's being written isn't finished. It's not we've made progress, period. It's we've made progress, comma. You know what I mean? Like there's way more to that sentence. And then to have this happen, and to let it just be like a 2, 3 week, 2 month, 3 month period of time is just not going to cut it. And we need to work further. We need to work harder. We need to be good fucking people. You were talking about just be a good fucking person. Be nice to your neighbor. But the problem is most people don't think about it that way. You know what I mean? Or aren't those people.
Yeah. Yeah, for anyone again who's watching, who's like F these guys, they don't know what they're talking about. To Matt's point, just look up, you know, punishment for cocaine versus crack, and then look up who's more likely to do cocaine, who's more likely to do crack. The punishments are way less for cocaine versus crack. You have to have money to do cocaine. Look at the communities that do cocaine. Look at the communities that do crack. Are more inclined to do those things, and you'll see disparities in the law, discrepancies in the law. Yeah, and I think sometimes too, when we're talking about law enforcement, they're enforcing the laws. So to Matt's point, you know, you have to change the lawmakers if you want the change. You know, I have a lot of law enforcement in my family. I know, you know, friends who are in law enforcement. You know, one guy I know, I remember he was saying, he's like, I get called. He's like, I just show up and I'm the bad guy. He's like, someone called me. Like I you know, and he was so upset about it because someone was accusing him of being racist. He's like, I got a call and I showed up. Like I didn't try to do this. Well, okay, so there are bad cops. Clearly, we've seen if you're unless you live under a rock, you've seen footage the last month. Not quite a month.
No, way more than a month. It's just way more now.
Well, yeah, I mean, like because people are caring about it more recently, as we've said a few times. So there are bad law enforcement. There are bad laws. There are bad lawmakers. There are bad people who call law enforcement. We've also seen a lot of videos like that where people are trying to call for things that aren't something you call the police for. So you have at the top bad laws. You have some people who are enforcing those bad laws. You have some people who are going well beyond enforcing those bad laws. You have people trying to get law enforcement for things that shouldn't be happening. So there's a lot of blame to go around. And again, just look up some of the, you know, or the marijuana stuff. I mean, you know who owns the majority of legal marijuana dispensaries now or CBD places versus who's, you know, what kind of people are locked up for marijuana possession. You know, as someone who's literally never smoked marijuana in my life, like I have no stake in this whatsoever. I'm a beer guy, but look up that stuff. I mean, it's it's not hard to see that the policies need to change, or at least enough of the policies needs to change.
And it's like across the board, like a lot of people that like, look, I've heard these things before, but like it's been hammered home. And I feel like, again, I feel like one of the people that tries to hear these things is that like when people even like when it comes to voting, for example, like people are like voting, hey, the vote, you vote, that's how it works. You know what I mean? Like it's not how it works, man. Like you have to understand, like when I vote, I'm lucky enough, I live in the middle of nowhere. I live on a farm. I live in a small town. When I go and vote, I go and I drive to my local, I drive to my local municipal, whatever, building that's having to vote, has the polls. I walk in. The most I have ever waited in line, my life, ever, to cast a vote for an election has been, 5 minutes, maybe. You know what I mean? And I'm in and out. I cast my vote. I'm done. I'm gone. You know what I mean? But you have to understand it. Like, I'm lucky enough to work for a job, and we're very diverse, the company I work for, but I'm lucky to work for a job that if I show up there late, they don't ask me why I'm late, but if they did and they went, oh, I was voting, they go, awesome. You know what I mean? Not a lot of people, they would actually like that. They want that. Even if I'm not casting a vote in their favor, they like the fact that I'm voting. Not a lot of people work for those jobs, so they can't take off to go vote. So when do they go vote? They go vote before or after work, most often after work, because most people have to work crazy hours, and polls don't open until like 8 o'clock. And in the amount of stories I've heard of people who live in majority, people of color, black communities, it's like, oh, the polls aren't working. Oh, the lines are super long. Oh, there's not enough people to help you. Oh, there's not, like, I don't deal with that. Is it because I live in the middle of nowhere? Is it because what's going on? So it's like, even the voting process can be like a nightmare. When it comes to certain communities and where people live. And if you think that that's because they just got the short straw, that they just happen to have all the machines that don't work, they just happen to have all the short-staffed polling places. I've never once in my life seen a short-staffed polling place or a place with a bunch of machines that haven't been working. Now, granted, you know what I mean, urban populations tend to have a lot more people, means a lot more machines, which means a lot more staff. I understand that. But come on. You know what I mean? So it's stuff like that where, like, there are reasons the way things are set up the way they're set up, and that's one of the things that I knew and I know more of, and it's one of the things that needs to change, because like, it's I don't know how to put it. It's like, you know, a fair, and I don't want to say fight because I don't want to use words like that, but a fair fight is a fair fight. Be like, here's a fair fight. This versus that. Whoever wins wins. And I don't want to make it a win versus lose scenario either, because I think that's not in the spirit of the conversation we're trying to have. But you get what I'm trying to say. That's fine. But when one side is so, like, starts off at such a disadvantage, it doesn't make for a fair fight, you know. And that's all anybody wants. When people talk about, Black Lives Matter, it's not a matter of putting Black lives ahead of white lives. No, it's like, the best analogy I heard, which is years ago when Black Lives Matter first started. It's like, okay, if you broke your leg and you said, I broke my leg, I needed to go to the hospital, be like, well, my bones matter as much as your bones, so tough it out. Be like, no, my bone is broken right now. I need to take care of my fucking bone. Your bone is fine. Well, the bone is fucking broken. So that's a dumb argument if you want to fucking do that kind of stuff. So it's just a matter of giving equal opportunity. It's a matter of giving equal, ability to everybody have the fucking... And I can't believe I'm going to say this because it sounds like bullshit stuff, but the American fucking dream. The pursuit of happiness. All men are created equal, and the pursuit of happiness. That's all anybody fucking wants. That's it. It's not that tall of an order.
No, it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. Good God. So let's do this. Do you have anything we haven't covered so far that you really want to touch on before we kind of start winding this down?
The only thing I want to talk about is maybe some stuff people can do, like beer-related stuff that would be cool.
Well, that was my next part, is what we're going to do moving forward. That's kind of how I wanted to kind of end this, all that stuff. You go ahead first.
Yeah, no, I have a bunch of stuff. Here's my second book. Okay. So this book I bought right when it came out. It is a Black author, and it's very accessible. It talks about like how he got into beer through Guinness first, and they got into craft beer, became a Cicerone. So it's like, it's a good mix. It's very much introductory. It's like his story as a guy who, craft beer was not marketed towards. He talks about like malt liquor and like Colt 45 and things like that being marketed to his community, and how he was able to get into craft beer as Guinness as the gateway. And then it has like, tasting notes for different styles. It's a very thin, accessible book. It's one of the ones that I'll send Matt the link so people, if they are interested, can, throw business his way too. And that's another thing I want to talk about that people can do is you vote with your dollars, try to maybe support. If you do, again, like Beer Advocate has a list of their compiling of Black-owned breweries. If you happen to live near one or can get beer from them, maybe make a point to check them out. First Sip Brew Box is owned by a veteran who's also a black man. They do a monthly subscription service. You don't get beer, you get beer paraphernalia, glasses, beer pretzels, things like that. Like support businesses that are black owned would be amazing. I wrote some stuff down. Fresh Fest. That happened in Pittsburgh, and it's two black guys who do a podcast about beer and comedy and things like that. And they want to see more diversity in craft beer. I'm not advocating everyone throw a beer fest, but what they want to do was try to get black and other minority-owned breweries there. But here's the thing that I think anyone can do. And I talked about this one time. I mentioned earlier that the district I worked at that had the disproportionality issues. We worked with NYU, and we were invited to talk at one of their summits, and they had us present. And this was a thing I kept saying. I'm like, I'm a white guy who runs this club where I'm the only white person in the room. People can do this. Here's how. Here's how you can do this if you're a white brewery. White breweries for Fresh Fest, all they did is they got a prominent member, maybe an artist, a politician, a business owner, a person of color known in the community, invited them in and did a beer collaboration with them. And then those beers from the white-owned breweries were also at this beer festival. Again, I go back to someone like my wife. If we go to a brewery and they're doing the Black is Beautiful beer that the Weathered Soul guys are doing and getting other breweries to do, or they did something like this, she's going to feel comfortable. Like, okay, the people who own this brewery are willing to do something like, if it's the Black is Beautiful, brew the beer, donate money to the cause. I know I'm welcome here by not only the patrons, or maybe not all the patrons, but the people who actually own the establishment. And that's easy. And I talked about this. I did a book review of that with Rod J. And this was a point I made when we did that book review together. If you're a brewery who plays hip hop music and you think, you're doing yours to be all inclusive, I better see your name on that list doing the Black is Beautiful and actually donating to the cause. Because especially if you label your beers after like hip hop references, I better see your name on that list donating to, when it actually counts. Because if you're gonna make money off the Black experience, you better be putting up money towards the Black experience.
Yeah, that's like double heinous. You know what I mean? To be like, appropriation basically at that point. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So
yeah, you better be giving back.
And honestly, like what you said, which was vote with your dollars. That's it. That's honestly all like in the beer community. I mean, not just the beer community, but outside of that, as far as like the most minimal thing you can do is vote for your dollars. And I'm not saying just throw all your money at all black-owned breweries and stuff like that. Live your life, do whatever, but don't just exclude it for the sake of like. Let's put it this way. So I was drinking this beer, which is from Montclair Brewery in New Jersey. They're not super close to where I live, but they're not super far. So they're kind of one of those breweries that like, and this is kind of a lesson I learned, personal lesson. So if I'm going to take anything from like not understanding and maybe understanding a little bit better, this is like a small little tidbit of how subtle racism can be. So they're not close enough for me to just like, I'm going to go to this brewery, but they're not far enough to where I shouldn't have visited them yet. But I haven't. Guess why I haven't visited them?
It's not a scenic drive.
Okay. So typically what I do, I have the breweries I really enjoy to visit. Ones that I think make really excellent beer. More specifically in New Jersey and surrounding area, it's like Kane. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to go to Kane today. What other breweries can I hit when I go there? Or I'm going to go to Equilibrium today. What breweries can I hit while I'm going there? You get the shtick. Yep. And then what I do is I typically open Google Maps and then I'll just search for breweries. And I'll be like, okay, I'll look at breweries and then I'll look at reviews, And then I'll be like, not that reviews are end all be all for me, but I'll be like, oh, okay, this one looks nice. This one looks nice. And I'll be like, well, this one looks okay. Maybe I'll skip that one and I'll go next time. You know what I mean? And that's where this brewery ended up. Now, I'm not saying that they don't make amazing beers. I had 2 beers. They're quite nice. Nothing blew me away. The other one I had was quite a bit better than this altogether I had. But just by looking at the reviews, am I getting a fair vision of what people maybe if you talk about maybe 10% of the population, and this is me just grabbing numbers out of nowhere, say 10% of the people are just kind of subtly racist, and they're like, I'm not going to give a great score to this brewery just because, and then that influences me without even knowing it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where, and let's say and I'm, again, not saying reviews in general drive me to where I want to go, but it's like, oh, this place looks good, I'll go there while I'm going. Well, I did that with Montclair, and when I did it with Montclair, I know I did it. I was like, oh, they look good, but the reviews of this place is a little bit better. I didn't know they were a black-owned brewery. I just kind of did that because that's what I do. It's kind of like, okay, I'll kind of be in that area. Where do I want to go? And it's one of those things where that's where those things can kind of creep in. So, spend, vote with your dollars. Be smart. Don't be a douchebag. Read and listen.
Yeah.
Fucking shut up. Listen, I never shut the fuck up. Shut up.
It's true.
It's true. Shut up. Shut up and listen. Like, you know what I mean? And probably and I know that I'm so bad at this. I'm guilty of this. It's okay to change your mind, man. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay. Like, if you are, like, and, listen, we're two beer tubers talking about race on YouTube. It's not like we're fucking moving needles here. But if you're have some kind of fucking hate in your heart like that, you know what I mean? And then it's something where it's born of upbringing, or born of something, or born of whatever, and it's just something you feel like, well, that's who I am. But it's okay if you don't feel that, you know what I mean? Like, if you're just like, well, it's just how I was brought up. That shit don't fly, man. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you genuinely a piece of shit and you hate stuff, then you be you, and hopefully, whatever. But, like, if you're just like, it's kind of like, to shrug the shoulders, it's just kind of how I was brought. It's okay to be like, no, that's not how I feel. That's not how I am. It's okay to change your mind. No one's going to be like, how dare you become kind and gentle and thoughtful? What the fuck made you think? That's actually one of the things that got me pissed off about the NFL. And that, like, I didn't understand it. Like, I understand the NFL is a business, and I understand they're a bunch of douchebags. And everybody railed on the NFL for not backing up Black Lives Matters, and not backing up, more specifically, Colin Kaepernick. And then they finally now come out, and everybody's like, oh, fucking assholes changing their mind. Be like, they fucking changed their mind. Yeah. Be like, don't fucking hate them for changing their mind. Like, that's what you want. Like, even if it isn't the most pure of intentions, but at least they're doing it. At least they're changing. Don't be like, oh, now you're gonna fucking agree with me. Don't be that asshole. You know what I mean? Like, be like, okay, now you're willing to have the conversation. Now you're willing to talk. Well, let's talk. Let's talk. Open your mind. Let's talk. And that's the most important thing. Listen, learn, and willing to have that conversation, man. That's it.
To tie it to sort of things, because people are gonna vote with their dollars, and like I said earlier, it's well above average, well over 50%, of Americans who care about this. So, like, put the pressure on companies, if they don't actually care, to get them to care publicly. And maybe that's what happened in NFL, and maybe they did have a change of heart altruistically. Maybe it was, they saw the writing on the wall where they had to do something because, it's reaching a critical mass, and even going back to the Blackout Tuesday, what a simple thing to do. Like, it was encouraging. I know it's not perfect, but it was encouraging to see, like, breweries who are like, we're also going to donate money to, Thurgood Marshall, scholarship for Black, youth going to college, or we're going to donate money to NAACP, or, a Black Lives Matter, whatever. It's like, okay, you know what? Not only are you blacking out for a day, but you're taking some of your money and putting it somewhere. Like, again, be aware of those companies, and, maybe throw them some business right now. Show them, like, this is something I care about.
Yeah. Okay. Well.
Any other comments or anything? We should
there's a bunch. Honestly, I don't really want to. And here's the thing: I keep flipping between things that I keep showing people shit that I'm not supposed to be showing people. Anyway, no, it's okay.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't want to make this into a comment thing to where we're actually sitting
Yeah,
here
no,
and then we're kind of like going through the comments and stuff like that. We've had, let's do it real quick. There's been a couple things I wanted to touch on. So there's a couple people, I forget who they are. So one is Beer Experience 360 said you should have on the one woman from Founders who used to work at Founders about racial inequality. There's also, I think, who was it? Charles Boswell actually mentioned that he's like, did you talk about Founders? Listen, we're not here to talk about like specific points of racism. The whole point of this was to actually have a conversation about this. Me and Kyle both being, you know what I mean, of the fair persuasion, kind of talking about how we perceive, you know what I mean, racism, how we grew up, how we view it, what we've seen, the things we've seen both in and out of beer, the things we've learned, the things we haven't learned, the things we should learn, and what we think we should do, both ourselves, but as a whole moving forward. And it has nothing to do with actually touching on those points. We're probably going to try to reach out, and that's part and parcel of what can we do moving on from here. I will probably try to reach out to some people, maybe do some podcasts, maybe do some live streams of people. It's not even necessarily just going out because they're people of color, but just like that has been lacking from live streams. When's the last time you did a live stream with a person of color in the beer community?
the Rajay book review I mentioned, and other than that,
Yeah, me
I don't
too.
think
You know, Rajay was the last one I did also. So it's like obviously we're not the only ones. There's people out there. You know, Chauncey has done stuff. I've wanted to do stuff with Chauncey, but he's actually busy being all smart and shit and having kids and stuff on the West Coast. So he ain't got time for that. You know what I mean? I want to be doing this kind of stuff, but he's fucking actually making a fucking difference where I'm yammering shit on YouTube. Yeah. And then there's a couple of women and gentlemen out there doing stuff like that on the whole YouTube kind of tip when it comes to those kind of things. So anyway, my point being is that yeah, this is probably the most herky-jerky, like uncoordinated like piece that I think I've ever done. But I think it's because it's hard to talk about. It's hard to talk about, and but it's good to talk about. I guess that's the best.
Yeah, and again, to give you credit, like I did at the beginning, I mean, it's how much prep work do you put in? How do you maintain authenticity? But also, like, just if two idiots are talking, it's just two idiots are talking. So, like, how much research should be done? How many things should be cited? It is a tough line to walk in terms of credibility, but also accessibility, whatever. I mean, it was. I think this was good. I'm happy with this.
Well, and that's the one thing I guess. If the one thing I didn't want to do was, and we talked about this, I didn't want to script it and plan it out because I didn't want to come off as forced and contrived and us trying to look good. You know what I mean? I just wanted to be as open and as organic a conversation as we possibly could have in a platform that we use. You know, and if, like I said, if this helps nobody, so be it. If it helps one fucking human being see things in a positive light, that's fantastic. More than that, awesome. But let's put it this way. For all the things I could possibly do to help during this time, this is probably the least I could do. And at least, you know, I don't know. If it came off shittily, fine. But at least we tried.
We did try. And you know what? And this is something we used to talk about at my old job. You know, if you're going to talk about race, you're going to step on landmines, and that's just part of it. And then, do you not have the conversation, or do you do it and realize? And I think that's what we did. And I just looked. Unfortunately, 2 people have not taken anything away from this because I lost 2 subs during this. So, but you know what? See you later. Anyone else who wants to leave, because
Yeah. So we're gonna cut. Yeah. So we're gonna cut it short, guys. We're gonna cut it off here. Hopefully, you guys had a conversation with yourself, with your friends about these kind of things. If you have any questions, feel free to email us directly, comment below, the whole 9. We'll try to get back to you. Like I said, we're probably going to put together a bit of kind of notes and references for some of the stuff that we talked about here, whether it be the books that Kyle recommended, stuff that I've recommended, stuff like that. We'll slowly fill up the comment section of the video. It might not happen until tomorrow or whatnot, but thank you very much for stopping by. I apologize if we actually kind of glossed over a bunch of the comments. It's just because it wasn't about the comments today so much as us actually having this conversation. So thank you very much, guys, for stopping by. If you have any thoughts, let us know. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully, you watch similar videos. Hopefully, you go out there and learn a couple two-treat things. And hopefully, see you next time. Cheers.